We do not have a test on Tuesday?
I like that.
I thought that you said that.
Did we actually land on the wall?
We should.
What do you mean? What is
Yeah. Oh, almost forgot. Before we get started,
What?
this is going to be great television. Oh no, it's gone. We're doing Friday. I accidentally shut off my computer screen. I had the Oregon Trail all set up to play. No. We'll do it tomorrow, I promise. I was going to go to a river. We'd make the big decision. Maybe go hunting. Once again, who's played Oregon Trail? Yeah, it's really realistic. Actually, it's got what it was. Whatever, it's fine. But you died of dysentery. Speaking of dysentery, what a weird segue. The Panic of 1837, what did they call it after the president?
Van Ruin stood right.
Van Ruin. And what is that nationalistic idea of manifest destiny, of spreading westward to be a continental power? But what did we want to spread?
Our flag.
Yeah, American civilization. And when Americans went to another country or left the United States, what did they bring with them? Yeah, their civilization as they saw. And whatever that meant, obviously, people would have different points of view on that. And we got the trade, we got the land. What was spreading slavery out to protect it? Diffusion. Did we get to Oregon Trail? Is that where we quit? We quit, right?
We quit
Which we quit at this?
Yeah, we quit at the one time. Zion.
Yeah, Zion. There's Zion.
Oh, I know. You know where I got this from? There's this guy who puts out pictures, and his name is the Vulgar Chef. And he puts the most awful concoctions out there to eat. So maybe after the AP exam, I'll whip up something special for you guys.
That looks
from the
really
Vulgar
good.
Chef.
It's cheese and meat for you.
So we got here. Can we get restoration? What's that? We should get more Spam. Well, what we could do is we can layer, instead of jelly, we use Spam and spread it on the inside of the turkey. Oh.
No, it's Spam. We tried it.
Wow. Yeah, we can deep fat fry it in lard. Okay. So we have as many animal products as possible. Do we get to millennialism? We got Theo-democracy. We get to Nauvoo, Zion. Okay, so even though they would take over the city government, the people in the county did not. There was a lot of fear of. I'm missing something. Wrong stuff. Fear of. I thought there was going to be something else pop up. Fear of Mormons amongst the Mormon population, partially out of misunderstanding, partially because of few practices that the Mormons announced in 1841, Joseph Smith announced. But the Nauvoo Expositor was a paper done by non-church members, and it bitterly attacked the church. Some for the practices that the church actually did, some were made up and claiming that they're creating a dictatorship and a theocratic martial law and things such as that within Nauvoo. So the battle lines are being set between church members and non-church members. But what infuriated the non-church members more than anything else was two things. First off, that Joseph Smith created a private army, armed and equipped. Now, his logic was they had been kicked out of New York, Ohio, and Missouri, and we needed to be protected. But you can imagine what the non-church members said. You're going to use this militia, and here is an engraving of it, with armed and uniformed. They're going to use it to take over. To take over control. And the governor of Illinois was very worried about this. He even began thinking about disarming this militia. But then even more controversial was in 1841, he publicly announced the practice of plural marriage. So multiple wives. You might hear it called polygamy, but they called it within the church at that time plural marriage. And Smith had most sources say 27 wives of various ages. That's why, but it varies. The point is he had multiple wives, and that was pretty common, especially for the elders of the church. And this was seen as blasphemy, along with certain ideas about nature of God and things such as that. Well, he is going to be arrested by county officials and militia for almost forgot. I jumped the gun here. I jumped the gun. The Nauvoo expositor was bad-mouthing, and Joseph Smith personally led, or at least that's the story, personally led. He would claim he didn't, but church members came and destroyed it, burnt it down, and destroyed the newspaper, and broke up the printing press. And that's a big deal. The printing press was a very expensive product, and that's the symbol of destroying the newspaper. You destroy that printing press. And he's going to be arrested for this. And the governor of Illinois sent the militia. The talk was to be arrested by the state. And they essentially were thinking about either breaking him out or protecting him. But a mob stormed the jail. And when he was trying to escape, he would be shot and killed. Now, lynching is torturing, or the process of torturing, attacking, and murdering somebody. So torturing somebody to death is lynching. Now, when most people hear lynching, you probably think of it, you've heard it before, you think of hanging. But any time a mob, usually a mob, tortures and kills somebody. And that's what happens. Beaten, shot, body dragged through the streets. And this is going to tell now the new leaders of the Mormon church after Joseph Smith died, we better get the heck out of here. And so that is where you get the path to Utah. Brigham Young would take over the leadership, one of the most important elders. And a couple things about this. First off, he sent people out in advance because they knew about, and actually Smith had looked into here, the Great Salt Lake. Why the Great Salt Lake? It's in a basin. So all the drainage goes into there and stays. That's why there's this salty lake, because it picks up salt along the way, and that's why there's salt blocks all over. But it doesn't rain very much, so it's incredibly dry. This area here, and isolated. It's perfect. It'll be here. Does that make sense? And there's one more thing. What country it's in? It's in Mexico. Get out. And so he led a vanguard of 400 members. They got to Salt Lake City, and the rest over from 1846 through 1847, so 46, 47. Very close to the Oregon Trail. They went on the Mormon Trail. This is a National Historical Site too, Oregon Trail and the Mormon Trail. And about 2000 went. These are some of the later migrants who came to Utah. This is after it's part of the United States. But it's a good picture of the wagon train. This is in northern Utah. And they went there. This is a picture of the basin around the Great Salt Lake, and it was perfect. They're hidden. They're hidden, so they continue to do what they want. The most controversial one was plural marriage. And, almost forgot. I love this picture. So here is it. Photography was brand new in the 1840s. And there are two pictures and two things about it. First off, can you see how it's kind of pink? It was really a common practice to paint their faces to try to make them more lifelike. Usually what happens is they kind of put like pink blotches on it. So they just look like black and white with like a pink blotch here. It's really kind of creepy. And the paint smeared. So they have that. And secondly, this is old school cut and paste, free computer. And they were doing this since the beginning of photography. They would cut the picture out. So they had two separate photographs. They cut Joseph Smith out, pasted his picture to a picture of Brigham Young, and then they painted along the edge of it to try to hide the edge. This is called airbrushing. And then took another picture. And that's how they would that's how they would combine photos. And that's the way it would be done all the way to the, until 1990s, when you could do it on the computer easily and hide it better. So they still call it cut and paste to this day. It's from that. And one more thing, if you're not sure, I know some of you are thinking, I don't know how old this photo is. We know it's an old photo. In case you were curious, it's old. And so Brigham Young went there, but they realized, he knows when they went, this could change, because as he is stepping off the streets for the new city of Salt Lake City. And city planning had been, was known about, they had talked about it, but it hadn't been done in a lot of cities. I'll give you an example, Helena. But he stepped off the streets of Salt Lake City. And if you've ever been to Salt Lake City, it's, for a big city, it's one of the easiest places to get around in. It's very well organized. You can go, I mean, it's just a nice place to drive around. But back to this. Young did this. There's a war going on. What war is going on when he went? The Mexican-American War. And he knew we might be part of the United States. So he sent members down here to a mission in the middle of the desert, a dry area, to set up a camp, basically a base, just in case they need to get to here and then flee across the sea. And they're thinking, they heard about Samoa, and they thought it was a lot bigger. They thought they might go and take that from the people who lived their lives. And so they went to the San Fernando Valley. They started digging wells and found this great artesian spring. So they began to irrigate. They began to grow lime and orange trees there. And people began to follow because of irrigation and the successful agriculture. And what city did they start? Los Angeles. And so that was one of the connections, which like, wow, one of those strange things. Later on, they would give up plural marriage, agree to the laws of the United States, and send it back, but LA would get a start there. And, the war, the Mexican-American War. We'll start this tomorrow, but did you know why it's called the Mexican-American War? Mexico-America fought a war, that's one reason, but why is Mexico first? Yeah, good guess, but no.
They started first.
Whenever you name a war with two countries, you name, it's like Franco-Prussian War, or the Turco-Russian, the loser comes first. Spanish-American War. The Mexican-American War, who won? Yeah. And so, for example, on Saturday, the two biggest colleges in Montana are going to play a football game. And so naturally it's called Cat Grizz, right? Okay, so moving on. And by the way, go tell Mr. Carter that. It's a fun joke. It's a really fun joke for him.
I have him say.
Yeah, remind him. So tell him Mr. Mahalish wanted you to know. So, with that, but all this is going to open up the biggest issue of this time. What system will follow? Will it be slavery or not? And the issue of slavery in the territories that will all open up now in this era with manifest destiny, that, everybody write this down, will be the reason for civil war. That is the reason. I've mentioned this before, but that is the reason. Slavery in the territories. Yes, overall, it's a system of slavery in the South and their desire to protect it. But remember, they wanted to protect it by spreading it. Therefore, slavery in the territories. Most Northerners were not abolitionists against slavery, but they were against the spread of slavery. That is the key. Remember slave power and other reasons too. Like Abraham Lincoln was not an abolitionist at all. But he did not want the spread of slavery in the territories. He wanted it to end. So, that is the percent of slaves. And you know, 1790, Constitution just written. It's two big areas. Then, as the country moved westward by 1830, you'll still see it's still mostly concentrated here. But look how the concentration of slavery spread by 1860. It's like the spread of disease. Oh, I like smallpox. Yeah. It kind of does. It kind of was a disease. And you also notice a few spots because they opened up slavery here and in Utah, which was a little bit ironic because Mormons originally were abolitionists, but then would change because had to be allowed into the Union. That's another story down the road. But all of this would be, or the symbol of all of this struggle of manifest destiny, movement westward. Who will get the land? The fight against, the fight by those who live there to save their land, would be personified by Texas. Texas would become the next big issue that would eventually lead to near civil war, the Mexican-American War. Oh, Texas. There's so much involved with Texas. So Mexico won their independence. Mexico became independence in 1821 from Spain. It's going to be a massive country. Father Hidalgo was one of the leaders of the revolutionary movement. I just really like that painting, so I put it in there. That's in Mexico City. And the big issue the Texans, or the new country of Mexico, had is northern Mexico, there was no population of Mexican citizens. And the part they were most worried about was Tejas. What's Tejas? Right here. This area, what is now Texas. Right here. There's no people there. They're not dumb. They look at the United States and how desperate they are for land. And they want citizens of Mexico here. And they know they need more citizens here, but also California is another, the same issue, but it's not as close to the United States. They need people there. And it was hard to get people, Mexican citizens there. And so the new, I almost forgot, Mexico became a republic. They became a republic. They had certain property owners could vote. It was a little like the United States. Not everyone could vote, but they tried to create a republic with a constitution. And so this new Republican form of government, they opened the door to immigrants from the United States. Now they're scared of the United States taking the land, but they say, hey, you can immigrate, come to Mexico, as long as you agree to become a Mexican citizen and agree to become Catholic. Now, you can imagine what's going to happen. You're going to get all these citizens of the United States. Well, there's virtually free land. Yeah, tell me where to do the oath. I'll do whatever. Catholic, sure, I'll be Catholic. I'm getting the land. But remember what I told you. When they went into Mexico, what did they bring with them? They still call themselves as Americans, American civilization, the flag. They never really left the United States. This is one of those, let's say you were a Mexican patriot, and you really care about Mexico as a country. You know what? You're a Mexican. You love Mexico. And if you could go back in time, if there's one moment you could go back in time for Mexico, it would be right here and say, don't do it. This will be a terrible mistake for Mexico. And it was. A terrible mistake. Because what happened is, oh, almost forgot. In Tejas, one of the reasons people would not come were the Comanches. The Comanches were one of the most fierce nomadic tribes. Now, because they're nomadic and they got to follow where the food is, they're small. Nomadic tribes are always smaller. They got to keep the family size down. Because you don't know, if you're following food, you don't know if you'll get food. And most of the Plains tribes, American Indian tribes, were nomadic because it rained so little. These were all farmers. They lived in cities, towns. Here they had to move. But the few thousand Comanches were the most fierce warriors on the plains. Them and their allies, the Kiowa and the Wichita, just dominated the plains. So like massive tribes like the Apaches, who were known as being fierce fighters, terrified of the Comanches. Even the Cheyenne were worried about them. And the Lakota was scared of nobody, but the Comanche. And nobody took to the horse like the Comanche did when horses escaped from the Spanish rule. They used their small ponies. This is a picture from the 1820s. And they showed them with lances, but their big tool was a small compound bow that they would make. And they could fire something like 6 accurate shots from this bow on horseback at full gallop in less than 30 seconds. They aim at trees or whatever. The big thing they could do, the really good horsemen, without a saddle, riding, they could loop under the neck and use their legs to guide the horse and shoot the arrows under the horse's neck to use that as protection. Now, how long did it take to shoot a musket? How long did it take to load a musket back then? So If you're really well trained and it's a smooth bore musket, you could do it maybe in 30 seconds. If it's a rifled musket, 2 to 3 minutes. How many arrows is that? And so just a few thousand Comanche dominated the plains. Every city had to be walled, there had to be fortifications. Who's going to go? So that's why they thought, well, the Americans are crazy enough. They'll do it. And so they asked them to go. Hey, they're so greedy for land, they'll come in and risk it. It's always the threat of the Comanches. It would be, if you've ever heard of something called the Colt revolver, that would begin to change things because of the rapid fire. So Stephen Austin was the first one to do it. The first one to get a large group of US citizens to cross over into Texas. And this is actually called Austin's Colony right here. And they move into the good bottomland along rivers. Eastern Texas is great for cotton production. It's in the right latitude. Some of the soil is perfect. And Austin came in. This is actually years later, but these are Texans who are reenacting those first settlers. And you might have heard of Stephen Austin. What's going to be named after him? Yeah, Houston, Texas. And so, yes, Austin, Texas, the capital. And by that eastern part, that's Tejas, even though they call it Texas. And soon these American settlers will kind of mispronounce Tejas, and they will be known as Texans. And these settlers from the United States. But what do you call somebody who comes in the land and just stays? They take it without legal title and just live there. A bunch of squatters followed him. Even more squatters that actually came in under Mexican law and did this deal to Mexico. All these squatters coming in. They just heard free land, they just came and took it. And Mexico didn't have enough forces to stop them, so they just all came in. And this is going to become a real issue by Mexico by 1830. And they're all coming in for tobacco. For cotton. Look a message on your phone or your watch, which is connected to your phone, not again, and they brought their slaves. They forced their slaves to come in. And one more thing, like we said before, they all called themselves Americans. They came to Mexico thinking, I'm still living in America, and someday we'll get it. And this is what's called a coffin. This was one of those caravans of enslaved people that would be chained at the leg, chained behind their back, and forced marched. This is going to be one of the symbols of the United States in the 1820s all the way through the Civil War. As you're going to get, for example, Virginia has a surplus of enslaved people, and they would march them to Louisiana or downriver for the plantations in Mississippi. Or they'd be marching to Texas. And I really like this picture for a couple reasons. First off, and you can't really tell, the men's chained in front, women in the next group, how miserable it is, but you can get a good idea. But you see two things I find really fascinating. First off, well, if they're chained at the leg, they're all chained together by their legs. They all have to march in step if you're chained together. Make sense? So the violin kept the music going so they could walk to the beat of the music. I like how they show that. That's just one of those things you don't think about. And, oh, yeah. And then the other thing, the American flag. Liberty. So they came into Texas. Well, the republic began to fall apart. There was civil war in the Yucatan, other places in Mexico. And all the Texans now coming in, along with the people who were already there called Tejanos, they were furious at Mexico City anyway. It's 1,300 miles away. We don't like them. And so General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna would be elected president and then make himself dictator. And to this day, he's one of the controversial heroes, because he's considered a hero of Mexico. And he now has to hold this massive country together. And step one, as he saw it, boy, did we screw up inviting Americans in. And so they said, no more immigrants. We're cutting that off. No more immigrants. And with that, no more immigrants. No more immigrants. I like that picture. Do you like mustachioed Santa Ana or clean shaven? Yeah, I agree. That valid point. Step 2. How do we destabilize the Texans who are already there? We get rid of slavery. Now, Mexico had already emancipated most of their slaves, and so this a blanket getting rid of slavery. And this, to the Texans, was a direct assault. Those who came there for the land, as they saw, we have this land, but we need the labor. The only way we're going to make money is this forced enslaved labor. And so they were furious and began to rebel. Along with the Tejanos, who didn't like rule from Mexico City too. They were kind of allied in this. Well, Santa Ana abolished federal government and created martial law. Martial law is military rule. The problem was twofold for the Mexicans. They didn't have any troops up there. And secondly, the Texans had to have a militia, armed and equipped, not just because of slavery, but because of the Comanche. And so the Texans already have somewhat of an organization, the Texans and the Tejanos. And this would eventually lead to the War for Texan Independence in 35-36. So in Gonzales, there was the militia and the local garrison of regular Mexican soldiers had given them a cannon because of the Comanche. And that's going to lead to the Battle of Gonzales, about a cannon. They came there, the Mexican forces said, we want our cannon back. And this is both Texans and Tejanos. Tejanos were Mexican citizens who were not immigrated from the United States. And this is going to become the flag of Gonzales and the first flag of Texas. That cannon, and with the great saying, come and take it. And you got to admit, that is kind of cool. You'll see some yahoos where this now is kind of this weird. I'm always kind of wary people have that, but looking back at the actual poster itself is pretty cool. But don't forget, the reason for this rebellion was because they abolished slavery. How dare you abolish slavery? We're going to war. Well, they couldn't take the cannon. And so that everybody knew that's war. And Santa Anna now has to act. And he's going to send large forces to take back control of Tejas. And that's going to lead to, two things. First off, Sam Houston was a guy who came from Tennessee. He was a Tennessee politician, and he was in the Congress. He was a protege of Andrew Jackson. He fought in the War of 1812. He fought at New Orleans. But after his wife died quite suddenly, he went into a dark depression, drank too much, got resigned from the U.S. Congress, and did like a lot of people did. I have all these bad things happen to me in the United States. I'm going to Texas. And when he got there, they found out that, Sam Houston, and he was in the Army. They gave him command of this Texan army, so the militia. And there's Houston in Texas. There he is at New Orleans. There he is, kind of the frontier guard, when they all try to act like Andrew Jackson. Sam Houston was very intelligent, very competent, and he knew one very important thing. I have a tiny army. I can't let myself get captured. He's got to save the army and pull back from the fringes of Tejas. And he ordered all the troops to begin to organize in one spot, to concentrate. But this is going to directly lead to the Battle of the Alamo. So Santa Anna moved north. He had about 6,000 total troops. 6,000. They were all conscripted. What is conscripted? What do we call in the United States what we conscripted? The draft. And we already know what that means, conscripted. Army, jail. Those are your choices. When's the first time the United States would do a draft? Civil War. Yeah, Civil War. Then World War I, World War II, then all through the late 40s up until 1972. Army or prison. So back to this. So most of his men Okay, they had more equipment than the Texans, who are this relatively disorganized militia, but their morale is pretty low. You know, these are mostly peasants from southern Mexico who have to march across the desert in 2 columns and then take back Tejas. And the plan was terror. Everybody he saw as leaders of the rebellion or took up arms, no quarter. When I say no quarter, what's going to happen to them? Kill them. And that will force the Texans to run away. That's the plan. No quarter. Kill. Then all the Texans run away, they'll reestablish control. 2 columns. So the city of San Antonio, and Houston ordered this evacuated, and Goliath, he ordered that evacuated so he could pull back here and concentrate his forces. Because he's outnumbered. He's outnumbered about 3 to 1. And has almost no cannon, just a few cannon, etc. And that's where we lead to the Alamo. The Alamo is a Spanish mission. Now this mission consists of the church, which is basically the only thing that survives now. And then these missions were like cities. They had barracks, they had places to stay, they had grain milleries, or a miller to crush grain, a granary, blacksmith, etc. And high walls, as high as 16 feet high walls because of the Comanche. But he had only about 250 men. And he didn't have near enough men to hold this. And a 16-foot high wall, so even though there are firing steps below the wall, here's a problem with a 16-foot wall. Just imagine I'm on a firing step so I can fire over the wall. Everyone get that image? It's 15, 16 feet up. I'm pretty high up. So the Mexicans attack. I can fire, load, right? Fire. What's going to happen eventually? They get closer and closer to the wall. Do you see it? Yeah, there's a blind spot. You can't shoot them. It's a terrible place to defend because you have to like literally go over the wall. And so if they can get close enough, set the ladders up and scale right over the top. It's a terrible place to defend, and Houston ordered them to evacuate. But the commander, a lawyer who also was escaping some wrongdoing in the United States and fled to Texas, Travis disobeyed. And he stayed at the Alamo and allowed himself to get captured or surrounded. The Alamo's right outside of San Antonio. All that's left now is this. And because of that, you notice the dates, the Mexicans would arrive on the 23rd and lay siege to it for the next week and a half. Austin then tried to figure out a way to escape. They couldn't escape. There were over 3,000 Mexicans outside the walls. And finally, on the morning of March 6th, the Mexicans stormed the walls. So this is the diversion at the church. This is actually pretty close. This is from the museum at the Alamo. They did a diversion here, and the main attack at this corner where the walls were the highest. The Texans only had about a man every 10 feet. Even when they rushed reinforcements, there was nothing they could do. Once the Mexicans got in that blind spot, they put up ladders and right over the top. The battle was over, and just like that. The Texans were overwhelmed. Now, one other person who fled the United States and tried to make a name for himself was a guy by the name of Davy Crockett. We will come back to Davy Crockett. But Davy Crockett would go to the Alamo, and then literally days after he arrived, he'd be bottled in, and he too would die. In the 1950s, David Crockett is going to become a sensation in American culture. It's hard to find anything that will compare to about 1955 and how popular Davy Crockett was. Every single kid in America had a coonskin cap to look like Davy Crockett. Why? Disney. Walt Disney. And I'll tell you that story down the road. He too would pass away, and they try to proclaim this, and this is going to become Texas lore, that they fought to the bitter end. They fought until the last bullet, used their musket as a weapon, and then they were killed. Is that what happened? Almost all surrendered. Oh, we're not going to listen to Davy Crockett.
Oh.
We will tomorrow. Right. I'm not sure how we did that. All the survivors were lined up and shot. Every single one were lined up and shot. Everyone lined up, mowed down. Tear and everybody else. Everybody else would know about it and run away. And then at Goliad, the southern wing of this army was attacking here. And over 500 Texan militia were trying to escape. Their leaders bumbled into a trap set by the Mexicans. Urrea was their leader, who he never wanted to quit fighting the Texans. And what did they do to all of them? Lined them up and executed every single one. So the Alamo is going to have a greater bit of mythology, lore, nostalgia. The Texans will romanticize the Alamo till still going on because they could claim they fought to the last stand. Where Goliad, they were surrendered and were executed. Two things. First off, that's the flag for one of the flags of one of the regiments at Goliad. You got to admit, that's a pretty cool flag. Yeah. Of course, it kind of looks like he just cut his own arm off, doesn't it? Let's put that on a flag. Okay, so that's active. Next, this will give the big battle cry for the Texans. Remember the Alamo, remember Goliad. They just about tore down the entire Alamo. By the end of the century, only the mission survived, and I love this. It was a cafeteria. But then there was a concerted effort to save, and it's kind of the mythology of Texan independence would grow, and now it is a national park. And it's not the most widely visited spot, though, in Texas for Texan history, even though you would think so because everyone talks about the Alamo. In 1959 and 1960, John Wayne would make a movie called The Alamo, the first movie ever directed. The great Western actor who always played the same role in every movie John Wayne was in. If anyone ever seen a John Wayne movie, you know who John Wayne is. John Wayne played one role, and that role was John Wayne. In every movie, he was going to be Davy Crockett, coonskin hat. And they made a movie set of San Antonio and the Alamo for the movie. More people today go to the movie set than the actual Alamo. To this day. The movie's about 3 hours long. It's really historical in the fact that there was an Alamo. After that, it starts losing things. You get my gist on that. Okay, there's a couple more. Well, they called that summer Runaway Scrape, as all the Texans ran away thinking it's over. And this is stories of them fleeing over the Brazos River, or the Sabine River, into Louisiana. But Santa Anna got overcome. He thought it was over. And he divided his 6,000 men into a bunch of smaller wings. He thought it'd be like a net and just surround the Texans and totally finish them off. But by dividing them up into smaller pieces, that allowed Houston's smaller army to defeat a wing of Santa Anna and get a victory. Do you remember the Revolutionary War? Washington didn't have to win the big battles. He had to do what? Survive and stay in the fight. And remember Trenton and Princeton? They weren't big victories, but they won. And that's all Houston needs. So Houston, who's actually just about got fired because he was trying to avoid a fight, finally heard that Santa Anna, and turned to be about a total of about 1,000 soldiers now, had isolated himself in the crossroads of the Brazos, or the Buffalo Bayou, a little creek there, and the San Jacinto River, and called the Battle of San Jacinto. That's the painting from the battlefield. And this will be a decisive battle. There's lots of stories about this battle, and there's certain ones that there's a few things that are kind of into the mythology of time. I will tell you my favorite story about it because it's my favorite story about it. But what happened was this: there were a couple battles, and Santa Anna knew he was outnumbered. He called for reinforcements. And what he did is he pulled himself in to this area surrounded by trees and water and swampy area, thinking he could hold it, but he trapped himself. And he was going to wait there. Now, part of the problem was there's all these big trees surrounding him, and also smaller trees called mesquite trees. If you barbecue, you might have heard of mesquite. That is really popular for barbecue today. But the trees have long thorns about that long. And so it's kind of like a wall. No one will go through, and horses won't go through it. And so he bottled himself up. There were a couple battles, And Santa Anna decided his exhausted men in the hot afternoon of April 21st that they could have a rest, an afternoon nap, a siesta. Sam Houston, getting reinforcements, ordered a small attack, and his men just went nuts and did a full-scale attack and surprised Santa Anna forces. And this shows the retreat of Santa Anna's men. It was a total and complete surprise, an absolute disaster for the Mexicans. Of the little over 1,000 men there, 650 would be killed, 300 would be captured, and only a couple hundred would escape. Look how few. You know, obviously you don't need the numbers. I just want to give you an idea of what a resounding defeat it was. The battle was over in 15 minutes. The Mexicans took off running. That's when most of the Mexicans were killed. Texans chased them down with their small little cavalry units or on foot and just massacred the Mexicans as revenge for the Alamo and Golden Army. Santa Anna retreated to a low hill over here surrounded by trees, and he and his staff were watching the fight. Now, he knew he still had almost 5,000 men, and if he could unify his forces, he doesn't have to lose. Santa Anna's still okay. He's watching the battle, and he decides to escape. He actually disguised himself in a private's uniform and was going to try to filter his way through the trees and escape and organize his forces. And that means I have to draw you a picture of it. I'm going to take you, who's been to Texas? Now all of you can say you've gone to Texas. Isn't that exciting? Okay, it wasn't that green, but I'm going to use green pin anyways. Here's the hill. Good? The Mexicans wore blue, and so here's he and his staff up here. These are very accurate representations of them. And you know, yeah, he's the general. See, it's got the big hat, right? Well, the battle ended so fast that the Texans weren't even able to use the couple cannon they had. 6-pounders, they fired a 6-pound cannonball. And these Texans are sitting there watching this, and they go, "When are you going to fire a cannonball?" "Oh, look, there's a few Mexicans on the hill. Let's shoot our cannon at them." And so they started shooting their cannon. So let me draw the cannon. So we got the cannon, wheels. Here are the Texans. And they're Texans, so they got really big hats too. That pretty close, right? That's pretty accurate representation of your average Texan. Yeah. And they started firing their cannonball, now a 6-pound cannonball, and they're hitting the hill and bouncing up the hill. They couldn't elevate it enough to actually hit them. So imagine there's Santa Anna watching this, planning his escape. He just changed into a private uniform, and he's going to try to filter his way out. And then a cannonball hits and bounces past him. Cannonball hits, bounces past him. He's not really paying attention. Cannonball hits, bounces right at him. Now, what should he do? Right? What did he do? He put his leg out to stop the cannonball.
Oh.
And so his leg is hanging there by a couple tendons, ripped off. He's in what we call pain. And so his men go, they made it, Santa Anna's hit. And he's screaming in agony. So naturally they give him opium to smoke to deaden the pain. And then they make a stretcher out of the uniforms, and he's still in a private uniform, but he's in agony, leg hanging there, and they're going to sneak him out on the stretcher. Well, some of the Texans who were captured, they thought Santa Anna was dead. Or some of the Mexicans who were captured thought Santa Anna was dead. So a few Mexican soldiers are like, they're crying, their leader is dead, and all of a sudden, there he is, it's Santa Anna! And so the Texans captured him. So he's ratted out by his own men. And so they bring Santa Anna to Sam Houston, who's also wounded. He took a musket ball in the ankle. So he's in pain too. And so you have two men in great agony, one high on opium. And in the process of that, Santa Anna had to admit defeat, and Texas would win their independence. And to this day, Texas or Mexicans will claim that that treaty was illegitimate. He was high on opium. He was not in his right state of mind because he literally had just lost his leg. And so the treaty is illegitimate. That's when Texas 01 is independent. Actually, they would negotiate for a couple weeks, and Santa Ana would be allowed to go home. But Texas would declare independence and declare themselves the Lone Star Republic. They actually declared independence right before the Battle of San Jacinto, but that was seen as kind of like, we haven't lost yet. And then they won. And so, yes. Well, Santa Ana would eventually go on to have over 1,000 artificial legs. And I will tell you the story about those a little bit later, because we're not done with Santa Ana. And he also brought chewing gum to the United States. But moving on. This is going to be the flag of Texas. Originally, this was the Lone Star flag, but then they copied the American flag. Sure. And they just assumed the United States would annex them. They just assumed. Last thing, I got one more thing. I know, those are rainbow. And they came in with slave codes. And they just assumed they'd be annexed. And Jackson wanted to annex them. So you got to get that. Jackson wanted to annex them. But remember the issue of slave power. And Texas is going to become the biggest political issue for the next 10 years. Annex Texas. About the spread of slavery. And here's why. Look at this real fast before you go. You see how big Texas is? Texas claims all the way up to what into now what is Wyoming. How many states could that be? All the slave codes? Do you see the issue? So both political parties didn't want to talk about Texas. In fact, the Whigs acted like Texas didn't exist. It's just an empty hole in the ground. Do you feel like you're there?
Yeah.
I'm going to erase this picture. I know.
Oh.
Now, that's my favorite Santa Ana story. There might be some embellishments. All right. Have a good day.